In September 1939, the war was barely a week old, and Britain was already losing. Not on the battlefield, not in the skies, at sea, in its own waters. Ships began to vanish in the Thames estuary off the coast of Suffolk, near the approaches to Liverpool. Merchant vessels carrying food and fuel would sail into familiar channels and simply cease to exist. A massive explosion would tear through the hull, snap the keel like a spine, and hurl engines from their mounts. Survivors described a force that came from below, a shockwave so violent it shattered legs, cracked vertebrae, and sent entire cargo holds skyward. But there were no torpedoes, no submarines spotted nearby, no enemy aircraft overhead. The crews who made it out alive all said the same thing. They never saw it coming. There was nothing to see. The Royal Navy dispatched minesweepers immediately. They searched the shipping lanes with conventional gear, cables and cutters designed for moored contact mines. They found nothing, because whatever was destroying these ships was not floating in the water. It was lying on the bottom, silent, invisible, and waiting. Within weeks, the situation escalated from mysterious to catastrophic. Ports began to shut down. The Thames, Britain's most vital artery, was declared too dangerous for shipping. And every time the Navy closed one channel, another ship would detonate somewhere else. By November, vessels were being lost faster than Britain could replace them. Winston Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty, would later call this one of the gravest threats of the entire war. An invisible weapon that could strangle Britain's supply lines before the conflict had truly begun. No one at the Admiralty had a solution. No one even fully understood what they were facing. But one man did, a Canadian physicist with grey hair and wavy stripes on his sleeve, the kind of officer that career Navy men dismissed as a weekend sailor. An amateur, a nobody, he would prove to be the most important person in the Royal Navy that winter. And almost no one has ever heard his name. The losses began on the 10th of September, just 1 week into the war. The merchant steamer SS Goodwood went down off Flamborough Head in Yorkshire, taking one of her crew with her. Hours later, the 8,000-ton SS Magdapur detonated off the Suffolk coast. 6 of her 81 crew never came home. These were the first ships lost in English waters in the Second World War, and nobody understood why. 4 ships totaling over 14,000 tons were gone within days. Another 10,000 tons were damaged. Minesweepers found nothing. Naval intelligence assumed torpedo attacks, but survivors reported no torpedo wakes, no periscope sightings, no warning of any kind. The Admiralty examined over 200 recovered mines through October and November. Every single one was a conventional contact mine. None of them explained the broken keels. Then November arrived, and the situation turned from bad to devastating. On the 13th, the cruiser mine layer HMS Adventure struck one of these invisible weapons near the Tonguelight vessel in the Thames estuary. 24 of her crew were lost in an instant, and 69 more were wounded. The destroyer HMS Blanche detonated nearby. She sank under tow with 2 of her men gone. 5 days later came the moment that horrified the world. The Dutch passenger liner SS Simon Bolivar, carrying 265 passengers, including women and children, struck 2 of these weapons off Harwich. The captain was gone instantly on his bridge. Between 86 and 120 souls were lost that day. First-class steward Wheezers recalled that the ship felt as though it had been lifted clean out of the water, with oil pipes bursting and passengers smothered in their cabins. A lifeboat packed with women and children was lowered into the sea. Then a second blast shattered it completely, throwing everyone into the oily water. Ship's doctor, William Besson, lost his wife, his daughter, and his 6-year-old son in that explosion. Thrown into the air with a shattered spine and a broken arm, he clung to floating wreckage for 4 hours. When a British destroyer finally came close enough, he caught a trailing rope with his teeth and hauled himself aboard. On the 21st of November, the light cruiser HMS Belfast struck one of these devices in the Firth of Forth. The blast broke her keel, warped it upward by 3 inches, and hurled her engines clean off their mounts. 46 men were injured. Belfast would spend the next 3 years in dry dock. That same day, the destroyer HMS Gypsy went down off Harwich. 30 of her 146 crew were lost. In November alone, 27 ships, totaling 121,000 tons, were destroyed by these mysterious explosions. That was more than the U-boats managed in the same month. The Thames estuary was virtually closed to shipping. Harwich was shut down. The Humber was shut down. Every time a ship detonated, the Navy sealed off another channel, and Britain's lifeline grew thinner. This was not a minor inconvenience. Britain imported 20 million tons of food every single year by sea. Between 70 and 91% of the country's staple foods, cheese, sugar, fruit, cereals, butter, and over half its meat, arrived on ships. Every drop of oil, every gallon of fuel came across the water. Liquid milk was the only agricultural product Britain could supply for itself. And now ships were being destroyed faster than they could be built. The war was barely 2 months old, and Britain was already being strangled. The weapon that was tearing Britain apart had a name, the magnetic mine. And it was not new. Germany had been perfecting it for nearly 2 decades. The irony is painful. Britain itself had deployed the world's first magnetic influence mines, called the Sinker, off the Belgian coast back in 1918, during the final months of the First World War. After the armistice, several of those mines were left behind in Estonian waters. Soviet authorities recovered them and shared the technology with Germany. By 1920, Germany had established a dedicated mine warfare research command. By 1925, German engineers had developed a working magnetic trigger, the EBIC dip needle mechanism. By 1931, they were successfully testing airdropped versions. Captain Hans Langsdorff of the pocket battleship Graf Spee would later boast to a British prisoner that the magnetic mine had been invented 8 years earlier, and that since then the cleverest German technicians had failed to find an antidote. Now, he said, the British Navy would have to start where Germany began 8 years ago. He was not exaggerating. The physics behind the weapon were elegant and devastating. Every steel ship is essentially a giant magnet. During construction, the constant hammering of steel plates causes the hull to absorb the magnetic orientation of the Earth's field. As a vessel sails, its steel body concentrates and distorts the planet's natural magnetic field, projecting a strong magnetic signature downward beneath the hull. The German mine exploited exactly this principle. It sat on the seabed, not floating like a conventional mine, but resting on the bottom in shallow coastal waters. Inside it, a delicately balanced magnetic needle waited for a ship to pass overhead. When the needle detected a distortion in the Earth's magnetic field, measured in milligauss, an almost impossibly faint signal, it closed a firing circuit and detonated a massive, explosive charge directly beneath the target. A minesweeper officer later described the effect. The shockwave would break the ship's back, rip open her hull, lift the main engines from their beds, and snap the legs, spines, and necks of her crew, all at very low cost to the enemy. This was why conventional mine sweeping was useless. Traditional mines floated at a set depth, anchored by cables, and sweepers would cut those cables with wire cutters, bringing the mines to the surface to be destroyed by gunfire. But a magnetic mine had no cable, no anchor, no physical connection to anything. It simply lay on the bottom, like a rock, invisible to every detection method the Royal Navy possessed. Sweepers could drag their gear back and forth across a channel for days and never touch it. The mine would wait, patient, silent, until the next ship came along, and Britain had no answer. Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty, issued a direct order: recover one of these weapons intact, at all costs. Understanding the enemy's mine was now the highest priority in the Royal Navy. But how do you capture something you cannot see, buried under water, designed to detonate the moment anything large and metallic comes near it? The answer came through sheer extraordinary luck. On the night of the 22nd of November, 1939, anti-aircraft gunners stationed at Shoeburyness, a military garrison at the mouth of the Thames estuary, spotted a German aircraft approaching low over the water. It was a Heinkel He-115 seaplane, one of the Luftwaffe's dedicated mine-laying aircraft. The gunners opened fire. The plane banked hard, released its cargo, and fled into the darkness. Sentries on the ground watched a dark shape descend beneath a parachute. Their first thought was a German parachutist, a saboteur, or a downed airman. They moved to intercept, but when they reached the landing site, they found something else entirely. It was not a man. It was a cylinder, roughly 7 feet long, made of aluminium alloy, with tubular horns on its nose and a massive bronze spring in its tail where the parachute was attached. It was a mine, and by a miracle of timing and geography, it had not landed in the shipping channel where it was supposed to arm itself, on the seabed. It had come down on the tidal mudflats, exposed at low tide, lying in the open on soft sand. Even more remarkably, the land belonged to the British Army, with a garrison and workshops just a few hundred yards away. A second mine was spotted roughly 300 yards from the first. The Admiralty was alerted immediately. Lieutenant Commander John Ouvry, a Rendermine safe officer based at HMS Vernon, the Royal Navy's mine warfare headquarters in Portsmouth, was reached at his London hotel shortly after midnight. He and Lieutenant Commander Roger Lewis were driven through the night to Shoeburyness, arriving in darkness and pouring rain. What followed was a walk that both men would remember for the rest of their lives. Led by a soldier who had witnessed the drop, Ouvry and Lewis set out across the mudflats on foot. They covered roughly 500 yards, slithering over slimy mud, splashing knee-deep through tidal pools, boots sinking with every step. The darkness was nearly total. Then the soldier stopped, pointed his torch ahead and said, "There it is, sir." The beams caught something glistening in the wet sand. Ouvry described it as a thrilling moment, light reflecting off a metallic object with horn-like protrusions half embedded in the mud. Germany's secret weapon, lying in the open like a gift. They approached carefully, identifying two suspicious fittings, one clearly a hydrostatic valve, the other a polished aluminium component sealed with black wax. They could not risk opening anything in the dark with standard steel tools, because any ferrous metal brought near the magnetic sensor could trigger detonation. Lewis pressed the securing ring into a signal pad to take an impression, so that non-magnetic brass spanners could be manufactured overnight at the Army workshops nearby. They photographed the mine, measured every visible feature, and made their decision. They would not attempt to disarm it in darkness. They would return at the next daytime low tide, roughly 13 hours later. Soldiers lashed the mine with ropes and stakes to prevent the incoming tide from washing it away. Then everyone withdrew to wait. Ouvry and Lewis spent that night knowing exactly what they would face the following afternoon, taking apart a weapon no one had ever survived, by hand, with no guarantee that any single step would not be their last. The 23rd of November, 1939, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The tide had receded, and the mine lay exposed once again on the grey Essex mudflats, a dull aluminium cylinder glistening with salt water. Before anyone approached, every man removed all metal from his person. Belt buckles, coins, penknives, watches, rings, even uniform buttons. Anything ferrous, anything that could disturb the magnetic sensor and complete the firing circuit. They would work with non-magnetic brass spanners, machined overnight from the impression Lewis had taken in the dark. The plan was methodical and grim. Ouvry and Chief Petty Officer Baldwin would approach the mine and attempt to disarm it. Lewis and able seaman Verncombe would remain at a safe distance, close enough to observe every action through binoculars, far enough to survive if the mine detonated. Their job was to watch and take notes. Every tool Ouvry used, every fitting he turned, every wire he exposed, Lewis would record in real time. The logic was brutal. If Ouvry and Baldwin were gone, the notes would allow a second team to attempt the same procedure on the second mine, knowing exactly which step had been the fatal one. Ouvry knelt beside the device and began working on the first fitting, the aluminium disc sealed with black wax. Using the brass spanner, he carefully unscrewed the ring. Beneath it, he found the primer, a detonator assembly containing explosive discs designed to initiate the main charge of 660 pounds packed inside the body. He removed the primer with steady hands. The mine was now partially disarmed, but only partially. He called the others forward. Together, the four men rolled the heavy cylinder over. There, recessed into the underside, was a second detonator, connected by 5 separate wires running deep into the mechanism. Ouvry cut each wire individually, isolating and insulating them one by one, with the precision of a surgeon who knows that one wrong movement ends everything. Then came the moment that nearly ended it all. One of the team placed a removed component onto a nearby rock. The instant it touched the surface, it began to tick, a loud, rapid mechanical ticking that cut through the silence like an alarm bell. Every man scattered. Ouvry described it as the company dispersing like lightning. They ran across the mud expecting the blast that would end their lives, but the explosion never came. The ticking was a clock, a delayed arming timer designed to activate the mine after it settled on the seabed. On this device, the clock had jammed during the parachute drop and never completed its cycle. The magnetic firing circuit had never fully armed, and this one, stuck gear, had saved their lives during the entire process. They had been working on a weapon that was one jammed cog away from being fully live. By 4 o'clock, the mine was declared safe. By 11 that night, Churchill was listening to a full technical briefing. He ordered work to continue day and night. Within 12 hours, scientists at HMS Vernon had completely disassembled both mines and mapped every circuit, every mechanism, every secret. On the 19th of December, King George VI personally presented the first Royal Navy decorations of the war. Ouvry and Lewis received the Distinguished Service Order. Baldwin and Verncombe received the Distinguished Service Medal. Less than 3 months later, Chief Petty Officer Baldwin was lost while recovering another mine on the 3rd of February 1940. The work he helped pioneer would continue, but he would not live to see its results. Now the secrets of the magnetic mine were known, but knowing how it worked and knowing how to stop it were two entirely different problems. The Royal Navy needed someone who could think differently, someone who understood magnetism, electricity, and explosives, and who was stubborn enough to fight the bureaucracy that stood between an idea and a solution. That someone had already been working on the problem before Ouvry even reached the Mudflats. His name was Charles Frederick Goodeve. And to understand why the Navy almost ignored him, you need to understand where he came from. Goodeve was born on the 21st of February 1904 in Neepawa, Manitoba, a small prairie town in central Canada, population barely 3,000. His father was an Anglican clergyman with a modest salary and a large family. His mother was a formidable woman who was determined to give her children the best education possible, regardless of what the family could afford. From the very beginning, Charles was the kind of boy who made his parents nervous. He filled the house with foul-smelling smoke and small explosions. His sister later recalled that their mother lived in constant fear he would burn the place down. He strung telegraph wires across the street to a friend's house and spent hours sending messages back and forth. He built things, took things apart, and rebuilt them better. During summers, the family would travel to Lake Winnipeg, where young Charles bought a battered old sailboat and restored it himself, patching the hull, rigging the sails, teaching himself to read the wind and the water. That was where he fell in love with the sea. He studied at the University of Manitoba, earning his bachelor's and then his master's degree in electrochemistry. In 1927, at the age of 23, he won the prestigious 1851 Exhibition Scholarship, a research fellowship that took him across the Atlantic to University College London. His new supervisor, Professor Frederick Donnan, did something unexpected on his first day. He refused to let Goodeve into the laboratory. Instead, he told the young Canadian to spend an entire week visiting every museum in London. Only then would he be allowed to begin his research. It was an education in thinking broadly, and Goodeve never forgot it. By 1936, at the age of 32, he had earned his Doctor of Science degree. He was a Fellow of the Royal Institute of Chemistry, a respected researcher in physical chemistry and metallurgy, and a lecturer at University College. He had married Janet Wallace in 1932, and they had 2 sons. He was building a quiet, distinguished academic career. But Goodeve had another life. Back in Canada as a teenager, he had joined the Royal Canadian Naval Volunteer Reserve in Winnipeg, drawn by that same love of the sea that began with the old sailboat on Lake Winnipeg. When he moved to London, he transferred to the British Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve, the RNVR. He trained on weekends and during summer exercises, rising to the rank of Lieutenant Commander by the time war broke out. The RNVR was marked by wavy gold stripes on the sleeve, unlike the straight stripes of career Royal Navy officers or the chain-link stripes of the Royal Naval Reserve. The wavy stripes were a badge of the volunteer, the civilian, the part-timer, and within the rigid class hierarchy of the Royal Navy, they were something else entirely, a mark of inferiority. The men who wore them were known as the Wavy Navy, and they were not taken seriously. To understand what Goodeve was up against, you need to understand the world he was trying to break into. The Royal Navy in 1939 was not just a military service. It was a caste system, with 3 distinct tiers defined by the stripes on a man's sleeve. At the top stood the Royal Navy proper, the career officers trained from boyhood at Dartmouth, bred into the service like racehorses. Their rank stripes were straight gold bars, and they wore them with the quiet confidence of men who had never questioned their place in the world. Below them came the Royal Naval Reserve, the RNR. These were professional merchant navy officers who held reserve commissions in wartime. Their stripes were interlocking chain links, and they were respected as competent seamen, even if they lacked the social polish of their career counterparts. And then, at the very bottom, came the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve, the RNVR civilians. Lawyers, teachers, scientists, bank clerks, and students who trained on weekends and volunteered for service when war came. Their stripes were wavy, curved gold lines that looked to career officers like something drawn by a child. The Navy had a famous saying about the 3 tiers. The Royal Navy were gentlemen trying to be sailors, the RNR were sailors trying to be gentlemen, and the RNVR were neither, trying to be both. They were called weekend sailors, Saturday night sailors, amateurs playing at war, and no amount of personal brilliance could entirely erase the stigma of those wavy stripes. When Goodeve, a lieutenant commander RNVR, with a doctorate in science and a fellowship of the Royal Institute of Chemistry, approached the Admiral Superintendent at Portsmouth, requesting destroyers for urgent degaussing trials, the response was blunt. The Admiral had damaged ships to repair and no time to waste on uncertain experiments proposed by an unknown volunteer reserve commander. The destroyers stayed in port. The trials did not happen. This was the wall that Goodeve faced. Not ignorance. The Admiralty knew the magnetic mine was a crisis, not incompetence. The scientists at HMS Vernon were working around the clock. The wall was institutional prejudice, the deep unspoken conviction that a man with wavy stripes on his sleeve could not possibly have a better idea than the men who had spent their entire lives in the service. The irony is staggering. By 1945, the RNVR had grown to 43,805 officers, outnumbering career Royal Navy officers by roughly 3 to 1. These weekend sailors commanded corvettes, frigates, minesweepers and landing craft across every ocean. 6,200 of them never came home. In 1942, the Admiralty quietly issued an order acknowledging what everyone already knew, that the fleet was now manned by reservists with a leavening of career officers, rather than the other way around. The wavy stripes were finally abolished in 1951, merged into a single unified reserve. But by then, the men who wore them had already won the war. And in the winter of 1939, one of those men, with his grey hair, his Canadian accent, and his wavy gold stripes, was about to do something that the entire career establishment had failed to achieve. Goodeve had not waited for the Shoeburyness recovery to begin thinking about countermeasures. As a physicist who specialized in electrochemistry and understood magnetic fields at a molecular level, he had been turning the problem over in his mind since the first mysterious explosions in September. Once the recovered mine confirmed what he suspected, a magnetic trigger calibrated to detect the distortion a steel hull creates in the Earth's field. He knew exactly what had to be done. The question was not whether the physics would work. The question was whether the Navy would let him prove it. He developed 2 separate approaches, each attacking the problem from a different angle. The first was a way to clear mines that had already been laid. Goodeve designed what became known as the Double L sweep, a system in which 2 small wooden-hulled vessels would tow long electrical cables through a minefield, pulsing thousands of amps through the water. The current would generate an artificial magnetic field strong enough to trigger the mines from a safe distance, detonating them harmlessly before any ship passed through. The concept was sound, but it needed testing, and Goodeve had no access to open water or Navy vessels. So he improvised. He ran his first trials at Canoe Lake, a boating pond near Southsea in Portsmouth, surrounded by families and children sailing toy boats. His own test equipment, small model vessel carrying miniature electrical gear, sat among them, looking no different from the toys. Nobody noticed. The results confirmed his calculations. The sweep worked. On the 10th of February, 1940, the Double L sweep destroyed its first live magnetic mine at sea. By June, nearly 300 mines had been cleared. The second approach was even more radical and far more important. Instead of clearing mines one by one, Goodeve proposed making the ships themselves invisible to the weapon. The idea was called wiping. A heavy electrical cable carrying between 1,000 and 2,000 amperes would be dragged slowly up and down the outside of a ship's steel hull. The massive current would induce a countermagnetic field in the steel, effectively cancelling out the ship's natural magnetic signature. A wiped ship would pass over a magnetic mine without triggering it. The effect lasted up to 6 months, required no permanent installation, and could be applied to any vessel in a matter of hours. It was faster, cheaper, and more scalable than fitting every ship with permanent degaussing coils. The scientific establishment was skeptical. Senior physicists doubted that a temporary treatment could reliably neutralize a ship's magnetic field. The Admiralty moved slowly. Committees reviewed proposals. Recommendations circled between departments, and weeks passed without action. Goodeve requested destroyers for full-scale trials. The request was approved in principle, but no ships appeared. The Admiral Superintendent at Portsmouth had other priorities. So Goodeve did what would become his signature move. He fabricated an urgent signal within the Admiralty, a message that implied higher authority had demanded the trials proceed immediately. The Admiral Superintendent received what appeared to be a direct order. 2 destroyers were made available. The trials were conducted. They were a complete success. The phrase "to do a Goodeve" entered Admiralty slang, meaning to get something done by whatever means necessary. Regulations and proper channels be damned. It was not entirely a compliment, but it worked. Goodeve chose the name degaussing for the process, after Carl Friedrich Gauss, the German mathematician whose name is the unit of magnetic field strength. He liked the word because it rhymed with delousing, and because the initial CFG matched his own. The speed of what followed was extraordinary. Once the trials proved successful, Goodeve's team scaled up with an urgency that matched the crisis. By April 1940, 10 degaussing stations had been established around the British coast, at Portsmouth, Devonport, Rosyth, and other major ports. Ships would queue up, and teams of electricians would drag the heavy cables up and down each hull, wiping away the magnetic signature in a matter of hours. By June, over 1,000 vessels had been wiped, and another 2,000 had been fitted with their own permanent degaussing coils, electrical loops built into the hull that could be switched on to cancel the ship's magnetic field continuously. Then came the ultimate test. In late May 1940, the German army trapped the British Expeditionary Force on the beaches of Dunkirk. Operation Dynamo, the emergency evacuation, required every available vessel to cross the English Channel through waters that were almost certainly mined. Goodeve's team worked without rest. In just 4 days, they degaussed over 400 ships, destroyers, ferries, pleasure boats, fishing trawlers, preparing them to survive the crossing. Without that work, the evacuation fleet would have sailed straight into magnetic minefields. The losses could have been catastrophic. On the 20th of August 1940, Winston Churchill stood in Parliament and declared that the magnetic mine had been effectively mastered. It was less than 9 months since the Shoebury-Ness recovery. Meanwhile, the Royal Air Force had developed its own solution, the Wellington DWI, a bomber fitted with a massive electromagnetic ring, 48 feet in diameter, mounted beneath the fuselage. These aircraft would fly low over suspected minefields, pulsing current through the ring to trigger mines from the air. The first successful detonation came on the 8th of January, 1940, just weeks after the mine's secrets were revealed. By D-Day in June 1944, over 18,000 vessels had been degaussed. Over the course of the entire war, approximately 10,000 ships were wiped and rewiped by Goodeve's method alone. Degaussing became standard procedure for every Allied warship and merchant vessel operating in European waters. But the Germans did not surrender the advantage quietly. They adapted. By 1942, they had increased the sensitivity of their magnetic triggers from 15 milligauss down to just 4, meaning that even a partially degaussed ship could still set them off. They developed combination mines with both acoustic and magnetic triggers, requiring a ship to produce both a magnetic signature and engine noise before detonating, which made sweeping far more difficult. They added ship counters, mechanisms that would let the first several vessels pass safely, then detonate under a later ship, specifically designed to allow minesweepers through and destroy the convoy behind them. And in 1944, Germany deployed the pressure mine, known as the oyster mine, which responded to the change in water pressure created by a ship's hull moving through shallow water. This type of mine was virtually impossible to sweep by any known method. The arms race between mine and countermeasure continued until the very last day of the war, but the critical window had been won. Goodeve's work in those desperate winter months of 1939 and early 1940 had bought Britain the time it needed to survive, time to keep the ports open, time to feed the population, time to build the fleet that would eventually carry the war back across the Channel. The magnetic mine crisis had revealed something important, not just about the weapon, but about the man who defeated it. Goodeve had a rare combination of scientific brilliance and ruthless practicality. He could do the physics, and he could do the politics. Admiral James Somerville recognized this. After the degaussing success, he gave Goodeve a simple instruction: assemble a small team, work on whatever ideas you think will help the fleet, and deliver results fast. This was the birth of the Department of Miscellaneous Weapons Development, officially abbreviated DMWD, but universally known by its nickname, the Wheezers and Dodgers. The department never employed more than 60 people. Its budget was modest, its office space was cramped, and its methods were unorthodox. But its output was staggering. The crown jewel was the Hedgehog, a weapon that fundamentally changed how the Royal Navy fought submarines. The problem with conventional depth charges was simple and deadly. A warship hunting a U-boat had to sail over the target and drop charges off the stern. But during those final seconds of approach, the ship's sonar lost contact with the submarine, creating a blind window in which the U-boat could turn and escape. The captain was firing blind, guessing where the target would be by the time the charges sank to depth. Hit rates were appalling. Hedgehog solved this by attacking forward. It was a battery of 24 spigot mortars mounted on the bow, firing a pattern of contact-fused bombs ahead of the ship while sonar contact was still active. The projectiles arced through the air and hit the water in an elliptical spread. And unlike depth charges, they only detonated on direct contact with a hull. No contact, no explosion, which meant the sonar was not blinded by unnecessary blasts, and the ship could immediately attack again. The weapon almost never reached the fleet. During a demonstration for senior officials, Churchill arrived late, was impatient, and wanted to leave for lunch. His daughter Mary grabbed his arm and insisted they simply had to watch Captain Davis's bomb thrower. Churchill stayed. 24 projectiles launched in sequence, forming what one observer called a strangely graceful pattern against the sky before plunging into the water. Churchill asked for a second salvo, then a third. He forgot about lunch entirely. Hedgehog went into production, and over the course of the war, it was credited with the destruction of approximately 50 U-boats. But the Wheezers and Dodgers did not stop there. When the fall of France cut Britain off from Swiss supply chains, the Royal Navy suddenly lost access to the Oerlikon 20mm cannon, a critical anti-aircraft weapon. Manufacturers estimated it would take 2 years to establish domestic production. Goodeve refused to accept that timeline. He requisitioned an abandoned railway shed in Ruislip, converted it into a factory, and had the first guns rolling off the line within months. By 1942, the facility was producing 1,000 cannons per month. His department also developed plastic armor lightweight composite protection fitted to over 10,000 ships, and contributed key engineering work to the Mulberry artificial harbours used during the Normandy landings. 60 people, a railway shed, and weapons that changed the course of the war at sea. By October 1942, Charles Goodeve held one of the most powerful scientific positions in the British war effort, Assistant Controller for Research and Development at the Admiralty, effectively Deputy Controller of all naval weapons research. He was 39 years old. 3 years earlier, he had been a university lecturer with wavy stripes and no authority. Now he oversaw the entire scientific apparatus of the Royal Navy. The trajectory is almost impossible to believe. He entered the war as a lieutenant commander in the RNVR, a volunteer reservist, the lowest category of naval officer. He finished it with a civilian rank equivalent to Rear Admiral, directing programs that affected every ship in the fleet. No permanent degaussing coil was installed, no hedgehog fired, no Oerlikon mounted without passing through the system he helped build. The honours accumulated in proportion to his impact. In 1940, at the age of 36, he was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society, one of the highest recognitions in British science, awarded for his contributions to both pure research and wartime innovation. He received the Order of the British Empire in 1942. In January 1946, he was knighted, becoming Sir Charles Goodeve. The United States awarded him the Medal of Freedom with Silver Palm, one of the highest decorations America could give to a foreign civilian. The Royal Commission on Awards to Inventors granted him £7,500, the largest individual payment for magnetic mine countermeasures. It was a significant sum in 1946. Goodeve divided the money among the colleagues and assistants who had worked alongside him. He kept only his share. This was the man the Royal Navy had nearly dismissed, a weekend sailor from the Canadian prairies who had to forge signals to get destroyers for his experiments. A volunteer with wavy stripes who was told his ideas were not worth testing. He responded by saving the fleet, arming it with weapons that turned the tide of the Battle of the Atlantic, and rising to a position that no RNVR officer had ever held before or was ever expected to hold. After the war, Goodeve turned his energy to peacetime. He became director of the British Iron and Steel Research Association, the largest research body of its kind in the United Kingdom, and led it for 24 years. He was a pioneer of operational research, applying the same analytical methods that had saved ships to the problems of industry. He received 5 honorary doctorates and the Bessemer Gold Medal, one of the highest honors in metallurgy. He remained, by all accounts, the same man he had always been, brilliant, impatient, and impossible to stop. In his later years, Parkinson's disease slowly took hold. Those who knew him recalled that he bore it with characteristic resilience, worrying more about being a burden to others than about his own suffering. And remarkably, even as the disease progressed, he never lost his sense of humour. Sir Charles Frederick Goodeve passed away on the 7th of April, 1980, in London. He was 76 years old. His name does not appear in any school textbook. There is no statue, no memorial plaque on a public building, no Hollywood film. The work he did was classified for decades, and by the time the files were opened, the world had moved on to other stories. He was a behind-the-scenes scientist in a war dominated by generals and fighter pilots. He was an RNVR outsider in a service that preferred to celebrate its own. And after the war, he disappeared into the quiet world of steel research, far from the spotlight. But his legacy is everywhere. Degaussing remains standard equipment on every military vessel in every navy on Earth. The principle he proved in a boating pond in Portsmouth in 1939 is still protecting warships today. The hedgehog mortar he championed changed anti-submarine warfare forever. The Oerlikon cannons his railway shed factory produced defended thousands of ships across every ocean. And there is one more thing. The mine that Uvry and Baldwin disarmed on the mudflats of Shoeburyness, the weapon that revealed Germany's secret and made everything else possible, is still on display. It sits inside HMS Belfast, the museum ship permanently moored on the River Thames in London. The same Belfast whose keel was broken by another magnetic mine just 2 days before that miraculous recovery. The ship that was nearly destroyed by the weapon now carries the very device that led to its defeat. The Good Eve Medal is awarded every year by the Operational Research Society, a quiet recognition of the man who saved the fleet and who the fleet chose to forget.